Okay. Okay. So let's see. Well, you were going to start. Remember?
Oh, I can start.
Yeah.
Just yes, I'm here in the Bay Area, General Bay Area, and I have a lot of, I would say, field experience. I'm honored to be in with you researchers here, and so interesting to see how this is coming to a focus. A lot of our kind of movement work, you might call it, being enthusiastic about growing perennial polycultures and so forth. And so it's brought me to take care of trees in people's backyards, do consulting and education on different scales, but mostly pretty small scales. I'd say 5 acres and less, although I work in teams on larger acreage, but we're really looking at affecting people personally. So what I'm doing in this context is looking at how we can take diverse cultural, agricultural practices that are basically in people's backyards, and how can we upscale them, and at the same time, how can we take sustainable agricultural practices on the broad scale that exist right now, are producing food for millions, and how can we teach some of that to these backyard people? Get a little more efficiency in the backyard. So we're coming at it from 2 angles. And fortunately, you know, I learned a lot in Hawaii, and I'll mention some Hawaii stuff, but that's where I got into this kind of crop diversification and cultural aspects, which were very inspirational. And then coming back here to California, yes, being involved with California Rare Fruit Growers in kind of backyard tree diversity and species and varieties. And so that's where I play, along with this gentleman here. We work together at Permaculture Santa Cruz. Oh, and I'll mention one more. So California Rare Fruit Growers, but also PA Institute, where we look for ancient trees up in the Sierras that were planted 150 years ago and try to understand where they come from and propagate those and tell those stories, along with amigo Bob Cantasano. I mentioned him. But we work together in Santa Cruz teaching permaculture. And so that's what we've been doing together.
Okay, so again, I'm David Shaw, and I'm just going to mention I wear 3 different hats just to kind of clarify. One is that I'm actually a new PhD student at Santa Cruz in the Environmental Studies Department. And I also have a background in agroecology from Santa Cruz. Second hat is that I coordinate a program called the Right Livelihood College at UC Santa Cruz. And so the Right Livelihood Award is known as the Alternative Nobel Prize. Hans Herren is a recipient or a laureate of the Alternative Nobel Prize. An honor to be here with you. And so this work that I do at Santa Cruz is to connect students, researchers, and faculty with these winners of this prestigious award, who include Wes Jackson, the geneticist who Greg Krimza, who we were looking at earlier. I recently hosted Dr. Vandana Shiva at Santa Cruz last week for 3 days of research meetings. Other people you might know are Edward Snowden or Daniel Ellsberg, human rights defenders. So that's a second hat that I wear. And then lastly, I run a company called Santa Cruz Permaculture that does education, consulting, and farming. And I actually have some of our dried hoshigaki here that we can cut up and share at the break. They're dried persimmons that were done in a fashion taught to me by a 5th-generation Japanese-American farmer, Tosh Oto, up here in Granite Bay near Davis. They're delicious, and they fetch a high value. So I wanted to start by just taking a few steps back to make a remark about what is permaculture. So there's no pointer, right? So you'll see the title of an article by Rafter Ferguson, and then his name and his advisor's name. They co-published an article under that title. This is one of his dissertation chapters, which was essentially a literature review, looking at permaculture and agroecology. In a sense, we're talking about the same stuff. I want to just kind of bring that together. I'd say the international community has adopted the language of agroecology to be this sort of frame for everything. Those coming from a more permaculture background might flip that on its head and say, well, in permaculture, agriculture is part of it, but so is natural building and tools. So let's not get lost, right? Let's unite under our common aim of really today changing the food and farming system. And so with that, I want to just, can you expand this image a little bit and just zoom in on it? I don't know if you can. It's okay. So I'm sorry you can't maybe read it very well, but I'll just walk through this very briefly because I want to get on to John's amazing slides. So what is permaculture? It's an international and regional movement of bioregional networks and itinerant teachers, right? So it is a movement of bioregional groups working in their place, and there's teachers like John, like me, whoever, that have kind of dropped into these different regions and then dropped out to try to like seed it. And through that, permaculture as a movement has grown very, very quickly across the whole planet. We disseminate and practice a worldview, right? A worldview based on simple solutions populism. I'm just going to come over here and pointing, hi everyone. Simple solutions populism, which is like we all can do something to make the world a better place. But humans as an ecosystem managers, which is like we are a keystone species on this planet, we can be used for good. And then it's based on volunteerism and individual action. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, great. So it's based on volunteerism and individual action, which is to say that we're not waiting for government anymore. We're not waiting for business. We're not waiting, period. We contextualize a best practices framework, which evaluates and adopts practices for ecosystem mimicry and optimizing systems, emphasizing, and this is key, this is one of the main ways that permaculture picks up and is differentiated from agroecology, maybe. Not much, right? But a little, very related, synergistic, but we emphasize things deeply in permaculture, which is perennial polycultures, integrated water management. That came up in the last talk. It's not a permaculture site unless you've got a berm and a swale and a gabion and a, there's all these different key things, whereas at our Center for Agroecology at UC Santa Cruz, we don't do that, right? That's one of the ways that our farm is definitely not a permaculture farm. And we emphasize alternative crops. And I want to just mention the planting strategy of permaculture is natives first, like productive natives like elderberry first as the first go-to plants, and then proven exotics second, the almond or whatever. And then unproven exotics on a very limited basis with deep control like last. Because we all know about certain plants that get brought in, horseshoe blue is an example, where it just takes over. We want to not do that. And that's a evolving bundle of favorite best practices. And then another key thing that this article points out is one of the key differences between agroecology and permaculture is the design system that consists of very clearly articulated eco-design principles and really unique spatial strategies. Those of you who know permaculture might hear zones and sectors coming up right now as those spatial strategies, emphasizing site specificity. Every site's different. There's no rule book that you can just scale up and say, this is how you do a permaculture farm. Synergies between the components, right? We all know it's about not just the elements, but the relationship between them to get to that lazy farmer stuff that we're talking about. And unique land use configurations selected to integrate practices for site and user-specific goals. The key last word there is goals. What do you want to do with your farm? Let's go to the next slide. So just very briefly, without needing to go into the details, is there another slide on this PDF? The down please. Yeah, okay, thank you. So this is just a really brief comparison of principles of permaculture and agroecology. Yay, finally, somebody did that. And so without needing to go into details, in permaculture, the principles are really upfront. You learn it on the first day in your course. In agroecology, I can say this, having studied under Gleesman at Santa Cruz, studied at the farm, and now doing doctoral work at the farm, you have to search for the principles of agroecology. And look at this. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different articles that we're pulling principles from, whereas in permaculture, it's in one book. It's in one place. And so we're saying the same thing, for the most part, actually, in terms of diversity, interaction, and adaptive management, there are corollary principles, right? We say diversity. Here it's a little longer, a little more poetic in agroecology. Species and genetic diversification of the agro ecosystem in time and space. We just call that diversity. So you can see the differences there. But there's no corollary agroecology principles in this realm of creativity and innovation. And I would say permaculture has Buckminster Fuller and so many of these like eco-designers as inspiration, whereas agroecology has its roots in early ecology and obviously agriculture. So just wanted to get kind of state where we're coming from with this definition of permaculture, just to kind of clarify, because I know there's one of the problems is there's so many different definitions. And with that, I will turn it over to John.
Yeah, we were talking about this at lunch, and I said, we have a big hug. You know, we're trying to embrace everything. And that's a criticism. We're generalists. That's what we specialize in, is trying to figure out connections between things. So, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, we'll start mine. This was originally a presentation adapted from a presentation I did for EcoFarm a few years ago. And so the theme of this presentation is really looking at farmers. And to get to productive perennial polycultures, we have a couple of kinds of farmers, and sometimes they're mixed, like Sonia studied. But basically, either you're a row crop farmer, that I'd love to see you get more perennials into your system, or you're a tree farmer already, you're an almond grower, and I'd like to get you to grow some understory stuff to get it more diversified. That's the two different angles. Personally, where we're coming from is, like I said, a cultural, we'll get to the agroforestry definitions too, but this is actually from Australia, Darren Doherty, and agrarians. And we'll come back at the end of this presentation to him, because I think when it comes to broad scale permaculture, he's the guy. And that system that they're generating, the agrarian platform, they call it, is really integrating a lot of this broad scale stuff that also talked about in the 80s. But it's really applying it now internationally, and it's very exciting. So you can see the mixed tree crops, et cetera. This is my contact, and Cornucopia, CRFG, Village Lake, and then Santa Cruz Permaculture is where we integrate. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. So just a few ways that we're going to go through this. Why woody perennials? And the themes that I always like to come back to are water, soil, and habitat. And those are the building blocks, I think, of stable ecosystems. So we'll talk about that stuff. I'm into plants, so we're going to talk about alternative crops and cool, things to grow that we like. And then also this human part of the polyculture. Polyculture, like people culture, like economics, land management, which you were talking about near the end. We'll talk about those again. So a lot of this is reiteration, and so we'll be borrowing from each other. This is out of Bill Mollison's Designer's Manual in 1986. And I love this picture because it's showing this elevational view there of these ecosystems at work. And I like also that we get to see underground. We forget about those roots and that soil and everything. So what this is really talking about is the interrelatedness. It's not so much, when I talk about biodiversity, it's not so much how many different things are in there. I'm a collector, I have that problem. Too many different things going on. It's more important is the connections between those things. And the multiplicity of those connections. So in the sense that we have kind of some keystone species here, and certainly in this ecosystem and in this bioregion, the oak tree would be at the center of everything. There's dozens and dozens of species that surround that oak tree, including human beings as another keystone species. But within that, there's all these layers of the way the trees affect rainfall itself and water through the soil. We talked about hydraulic lift earlier today, how deep-rooted trees can actually lift up deep water and redistribute it to shallow-rooted plants at different times of the year. I mean, all these aspects are just attracting rain just through transevaporation and cooling and condensation and all these things. These are the magic of especially trees, but indeed any plant, and the perennialness of it, the woodiness of it, adds this kind of investment up front, but longevity and less inputs needed theoretically for a very long lifespan of productivity, and that's what we're going for here. But all the understory and all the other, habitat functions make it a whole. It's not just a lone tree. It's all the things with it and the other trees around it too. So, and then the human being there, we're learning, teaching. It's, how could I say, one of the permaculture, we get brownie points for observation and just sitting there and soaking it in. And that's important because we have a lot to learn. So water. both water infiltration and holding capacity is the foundation of life and plant growth and everything else we're talking about here. Without that, if we don't have a water situation right, we're not going anywhere. So in this example, this is Mark Shepard's farm in Viola, Wisconsin. One of the best examples of broad scale. It's very specific. He's written the book Restoration in Agriculture. And this is an example of a tillage system, a cropping system that is laid out in a very linear fashion for efficiency, because he was using mechanical equipment, or you could use horse drawn if you want. But it's laid out on a soil and water conserving aspect with the contours, working with the contours of the soil. This is taken after keyline systems, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. But these are actually drawing water from valleys out to ridges. The way it's done, it's tricky, but they find a keyline where the slope changes, and if they do parallel tillage to that, it ends up drawing water. It's slightly kind of downhill to the ridges. And in that way, they're redistributing water passively in the landscape. And the method that they use, next. Oh, well, also, yeah, not only do we have to percolate water and hold water, but we know in those rainy times of the year, especially here in California with our heavy soils, that we also need drainage. So it's a balance. It's a balancing act. We don't just, make everything a pond, but we have to have drainage. So ridging, in this case, this is ripped and mounded, so it's going to conserve water, but at the same time, the crowns will always be, aerated, even in winter months. And that's from Darren Doherty, rare instance. So this is modeled after this Australian landscape manager, P.A. Yeomans, and this key line for every farm, challenge of the landscape. These are techniques in a very arid climate where every property at the lower end of the property has a pond, has a water retention system. And so he was trying to figure out how to passively, with a little bit of earthworks, figure out how to spread water to the ridges, how to hold water, distribute it efficiently. So they're part of our permaculture tool belt. It's in there. Again, permaculture is about design, so we're borrowing from all these different methods and integrating them into a design that's site-specific. Next. So a little bit more on this keyline or chisel plow. So yes, indeed, this is tillage. Yet. The amount of bare soil is minimized. The purpose of it is aeration. And the subsoiling chisel there is just lifting slightly. It's up at an angle a little bit, and depending on the density of the soil, the compaction, it might go just 6 inches the first year, and then they'll shift over a foot and do a little bit deeper the next year. Seeds go in at the same time. There's a lot of different ways it can work, but and sometimes they have an oscillator in there to kind of loosen things up. So you're fracturing, and you're allowing water to percolate, not run off and run into channels maybe towards ridges. And in this case, they're using it in between a high-density tree crop, maybe on a double spacing. And this gets into a fourth dimension of time, the succession, catch cropping, all these things where, you get twice the harvest with a double density planting. And then when they get too crowded, you take out half of them and on you go. But you're getting that initial crop faster or more of it anyway. Next. So to go on, you can't talk about water without soil and soil without water. So just some of the strategies we're looking at in our perennial polycultures is undisturbed soil, erosion control, and maintaining the soil food web continuity, and this whole connectedness that we're just learning about now in the last 10 years about this whole, not only for nutrients, but this communication system, this kind of early warning system, this stimulation of defenses, which is, we'll just mention as we go through. Go ahead. So the soil, looking at cover crops certainly, and then even in climates that are much more difficult for pest and disease than here in California, we have such arid summers and everyth's, kind of gets cleaned out. Here's Michael Phillips working with what he calls biological mowing at the peak of his flowering of his plants, recycling that, right when those trees need those nutrients in the spring. He's one of my heroes when it comes to looking at a kind of a beyond organic approach to orcharding especially. He has the Holistic Orchard is probably his best book for some of that. Next, his latest book, he's really gotten into it with the soil stuff, mycorrhizal plant. So yes, this network, we knew about it 20, 30 years ago, but now it's getting more complex. The more we start to learn about it, it's not just water, it's not just phosphorus and minerals, but it's more. Next. So this is signaling communication in plants, in plant symbiosis. These folks, you can find that. I don't have all the paywalls handled. Well, I guess I do, but I don't take advantage of them enough. So sometimes I'm just reading abstracts, But this is being documented amazingly well, but also at the same time, it's coming out into popular culture. This was in the New Yorker magazine on the left there. This is an artist's interpretation of this communication system that the soil really is through the mycorrhizal fungal networks. And so they're having little email messages there. Anyway, next. And this is in Espanol, if you can read Spanish, but this concept of the World Wide Web as a metaphor, like the World Wide Web, right? And I think Paul Stamets kind of came up with that one too, right? But here we're looking at not only connections between the roots, but the signaling that's going on such a, it wasn't until recently where we're getting down to molecules, being able to analyze down to a molecule this communication of volatile chemicals, both being, aerosols from leaves, et cetera, but also through mycorrhizal networks, signaling of not only, pest attack, defense. So you're building up all these immune response chemicals, basically the immune system that repels pests, herbivore pests, but also happen to stimulate our immune system at those cyanins and different terpenes and stuff that actually stimulate our human immune systems. Isn't that wonderful? Not only that, but they're actually not only repelling pests, but they're actually attracting pest predators. That's been documented now. Attracting pest predators. It's pretty phenomenal details that are coming out now. Next. So that brings us to this whole discussion of habitat and what I might call the social relationships with these plants, which gets into like what people talk about in the sense of like, what is it when you plant your compatible plants? Companion planting. It's like my friend Robert Corrick, did a whole survey, literature review, like, where are these ideas coming from? Have they ever been proven? The main thing I like to say about this is that to my students who are like, give me the best combination of plants possible. It's like, well, most plants are pretty neutral. Some are allelopathic and might repel against each other. Some kind of really get together well, but mostly they're kind of neutral. So it's probably okay, most combinations. So
summarizes the conference right there.
Yeah. So next. But there's some that are really important, like we were talking about earlier, these hedgerows. And again, there's the elderberry in there, but we also have our California lilac, the ceanothus, and even the deer grass in this particular combination was proven. This is 2011. They proved that there was, in fact, in adjacent orchards, less pesticides needed for pest control because they had more red beetle and syrphid fly effects, attracted and effective. So that's exciting. Next. So we have these great resources, like you say, that there's cost sharing, there's these guides, and here in California, we have this one with California Alliance for Family Farms and came out with this resource guide for farmers on hedgerows and farmscaping. But out of California, but for the entire United States, those of you who aren't here in California, and hopefully in other parts of the world, there's organizations like the Xerces Society who is doing this work regionally, bioregionally, trying to understand what are these important native pollinators and pest predators, how can we encourage them with appropriate plantings of native species, et cetera. So the subtitle here is attracting native pollinators, protecting North America's bees and butterflies, ensure pollination, identify the flower visiting insects, provide host plants, and create a landscape that's beautiful, diverse, pollinator friendly. That's the work we're doing next. So yes, to get them interplanted in the orchard is another level, but these wild spaces that are unkept, they're often having their harbors for problems like pest and disease. Can we be cropping things like native wildflowers or appropriate kinds of plants, even if they're annuals, let alone perennial polycultures next. So let's look at some. So this is going way back. We're talking about agroecology, biological control that's lost. This is back in 1986. They're studying right down here in Watsonville, looking at cover crops and just managing cover crops properly, when to mow them, when to seed them, understanding the cycle of the pests and the predators. They're all in the mix there. They found, just in a simple this is actually in Sonoma County, just simple things like bell beans. Known beneficial to the soil, also beneficial for these pest predators. Next. So my perspective, especially having spent time in Hawaii for about 15 years, just blown away about the polyculture there of people from all over the Pacific Rim, the native Hawaiians, Filipinos, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Caucasian folks, European folks, Portuguese, just an amazing amount of diversity there. And I was especially struck by, I met the daughter of Dr. Randy Thaman. Sorry, this is, unclear. Dr. Clark and Thaman out of University of the South Pacific wrote this book, Agroforestry for the Pacific Islands, Systems for Sustainability. And I loved how they were studying all these small islands in the South Pacific, trying to understand what the ecological and cultural functions and uses of trees were in their societies. And this is kind of a group toward ecological, there's tools, fuel. There's all these things. So yes, food, and what else do we need as human beings? These are people that didn't have Walmart and Safeway, right? They're dependent on their forest systems for their very livelihoods. And so all these things we might take for granted are potential crops for us industrialized folks too. These are things that we need and could get to at a subsistence level or maybe a value-added level, maybe a very elite, high dollar value level.
Well, but also just biomass crops, like so much of corn and when I was growing for bioenergy. So we're also talking about energy here too.
Oh yeah, so we've got timber, craft, ecological, things that we talk about, ecosystem functions, weed control, habitat or climate buffering, the cultural, economic, the timber, how about wrapping papers, like there's so many layers to it that when you talk to chefs, when you talked about cultural practitioners, people who have traditions, these are the things they're looking at. This is how we used to do things. And why? It tastes different, it has this function. There's things that I don't think that all the Western science can take the time to figure out. They're just cultural traditions, and they are value in and of themselves. But I wanted to point out a few ones at the bottom there. Did you think about toilet paper? Did you think about embalming corpses? Did you think about lovemaking sites?
Yes, I did.
These are all cultural aspects of tree crops in the South Pacific. Next.
14 minutes left.
So to acknowledge the multiple uses of plants, every plant has a use ecologically, and most of them have some chemical constituents, if you want to use it in an industrial perspective, as Dr. James Duke did, working for the USDA for decades. He's passed away recently, but these are all the popular books that he wrote. And then there's there's one, CRC Manuals, the Handbook of Proximate Analysis Tables of Higher Plants, where you can get every chemical constituent that these plants are producing on a per acre basis, et cetera. So you can really start to look at not only, you know, industrial uses, but also cultural uses, what we call ethnobotany. Next. So agroforestry is often thought of these common things that are being funded now by NRCS and other groups. Riparian buffer zones to protect, you know, water quality. Alley cropping, where we're kind of getting things linear, like we mentioned. Windbreaks, of course, are traditional. Forest farming, growing things in shade. And silvopasture, mixing in animals. A couple that aren't mentioned here are living fences that are very popular in the tropics. But also as hedgerows in Europe are very traditional and are hundreds of years old. And also the home garden as an agroforestry technique. The use of trees and plants in the backyard as a subsistence strategy. Next. Just to review some of the groups that are working with agroforestry and perennial crops I just wanted to mention. You know, a lot of it in the center of the United States, a North Central Center, USDA, National Agroforestry Center, in Nebraska, University of Missouri, all these places, Savannah Institute. That's where it's happening. I think you're right. It's the summer rains that really add to it. It's a little tougher here, but let's talk about dry summers next. So this is pretty typical. This is, again, a double density nut tree planting that they're going to just take out them, they're going to get twice as much fruit that first fifth, the first harvest, the fifth or seventh year, whatever it is. They'll get twice as much, and then when they get crowded, they'll take other one out. And meanwhile, they're doing annuals, in this case, just summer squash. Next. But getting into, like, animals and forage and all these things, J. Russell Smith was really the inspiration for the permaculture movement, I would say, in his tree crops, a permanent agriculture. Sounds like permaculture, yeah. So 1923, right before the Dust Bowl, he was talking about this. Next, here's a bunch of
if you haven't read the book, he's looking at tree crops as a replacement for corn or soy.
Yes, we'll get to it.
Okay.
Here, first, next one. So this is in the furnace piece. That's a train going around the earth 20 times with boxcars of soil. And that's how much soil is being washed away in the Mississippi River every year. In the year, well, he redid this in the 40s. So that's how much soil was being lost in the United States. Good thing they have 30-foot deep soil in Iowa, right? So this was what he was talking about. What is most of the crops being grown for? Animal fodder, animal feed. So he was looking at tree crops to feed animals. Next. So they revived this contest of Savannah Institute of looking at honey locust. And I just saw this, and basically nobody came up with a better cultivar yet in this survey that they did a couple of years ago. So I guess it's just time to start crossing and breeding them again. But they were just going out like they've done for pawpaws and different fruits. They've gone out and asked people, what's the best mesquite? What's the best oak that you have? What's the most productive one? And kind of crowdsource it. So that's what they were attempting to do here. Next. So in that lineage of J. Russell Smith, this guy, Toyohiko Kagawa, was inspired by J. Russell Smith. He was a Christian pacifist, and he coined this term three-dimensional forestry. And that inspired Sholto Douglas, who came up with this in 1956 to study from UNESCO, the impact of science and society at a land rescue agriculture, he called it, which was this tree cropping system, three-dimensional forestry in South Africa is where he studied it. Then Robert Hart worked with Sholto Douglas, and Robert Hart next was developing this idea of a forest garden in 7 layers. So this is the kind of permaculture way we've been introduced to this. And so I say that the ground covers are a really important aspect to get accessibility to your crops. The density of this planting, so we have layers, is the stacking. The stocking has to do with sun availability, water availability, and nutrient availability. If you're lacking in any of those, you're going to have to spread the plants out. But if you have, like in the tropics, lots of water, lots of sun, and lots of nutrients, perhaps you can just pile things on top of each other and they tend to thrive. So next. There has been, in the last 10 to 20 years, a huge amount of work and research on that. Not necessarily scientific, but many of it documented well and footnoted, especially I would point to the Edible Forest Garden books by Jackie and Tonsmeyer. It's probably the most college-level text on trying to develop these complex systems. But there's a lot of popular books out that describe different ways that people are doing this in their backyards. And I think this experimentation in the backyard is where new things are going to be discovered, and then they're going to get proven on the farm or disproven on the farm because they're cultural practices at this point. But I also want to point out Eric Torrensmeyer book, The Carbon Farming Solution, as another very well-researched and footnoted reference for all these kinds of sustainable techniques. Next. So go ahead. So yes, getting to some crops. So of all the crops I suggest to people, I really like berries because they can do with less direct sun often. They're smaller in stature, and they're easier to work with because though they're kind of woody, they're not so woody, you know? You can kind of move them in and out more easily, and sometimes you need to because they have a certain lifespan that's maybe 3 to 10 years or something like that. But just looking at the diversity of possible crops, name them if you can.
Mulberries?
Yes. Blueberries. Currants, yeah, the red and black currants. Some of those black raspberries, yeah.
Gooseberry?
Yes, and gooseberry, next.
And blueberry?
More.
Raspberry.
Elderberry.
Elderberry.
Strawberry.
So we have these pictures of the elderberry,
Goji
the goji berries. Yes, the honeysuckle, Lonicera, right? You know those, the hascaps.
Which one is that?
That's the one in the lower right. That's the hascap or Lonicera.
And then elderberry, is that what that is? No.
Elderberries on the left there in the middle,
Yeah.
and the goji berries up the right.
What's the bottom, middle?
Bottom middle, that's a black currant. Yeah, next. So in doing this research, I'm like, okay, we have a dry summer though. What are we gonna grow in a dry summer climate? I did some research in Italy. They had this thing from the EU. They were talking about wild asparagus, a very small, thin asparagus that they planted right in the row with the trees with occlusion materials, you know, shade, weed mat, basically, but still leaving in between the row availability for winter planted grains or alliums or brassicas or legumes as a rain-fed overwintering crop still available in kind of the alleys between the olive trees. Next. Looking at just possibilities. Talk about labor intensive. Right? Per square foot. I might be getting a hold of some of these. But yes, these are literally hand harvested crocus flowers for indeed. And so this is totally adapted to the Mediterranean climate. Is this something that you're into? Is this part of your culture? Is this something you want to devote yourself to? Next. Anybody recognize this one? Capers, indeed. Capers spinosa. Tricky to get going, and labor intensive indeed, but there you go. That's what we're trying to do is get more work, more jobs, more dollar per square foot is what I'm looking at. Next. Thank you. So go on. Animal integration, I think, is an important part of this. Now, if you're getting the big animals, you gotta be a big animal person. But the smaller animals are very easy. This is a mixed flock. They all have different trophic levels they're dealing with, the guinea fowl, the ducks, the geese, the chickens. And so they combine easily. You've seen that with Joe Salatin's kind of succession of his animals on his land. Next. And then certainly you can go big. You know, you can, this is in Spain, in Iberia or Portugal, with the cork oaks and the pigs finished off on the acorns. Next. And this is just more European style of grazing understory. See how the trees are higher? So it's a different system. We have low trees here in California, but this would be what you need to do with more animal integration. Next. Next. So also looking at the shade-tolerant crops for the forest gardening, so to speak, the forest agriculture. American ginseng, there's native plants that are actually endangered now that are being cultivated in shade situations next that have very high value, including fungi, in this case shiitake mushrooms. Very profitable and great. You have this shady place, I can't grow anything. This is the place you grow these. Next. Next. And so lastly, to complete this, are these social connections. Polyculture, permanent perennial polycultures is not just plants, it's people too, a polyculture of people. Next. And so looking at all the different aspects we have to consider. For the farmers that are thinking of leases, we're thinking of long-term leases. You're just getting started with 5 years. You have to look at 15 years is kind of a minimum return on most woody perennials. So you're looking at different types of land tenure. So it's a different paradigm to do tree crops and than to be doing row crops, just to say that. I think that the permanent, taking land out of speculative economics is important. That's why these land trusts like we have are important in buying the development rights and paying the farmer. And then it's never developed. It's always going to be in agriculture. So that's so important for the local culture, but also young farmers to have access to that land because there's less and less of it around. But also to talk about these training programs like ALBA down in Watsonville area, where they're taking former farm workers, training them to be organic farmers, and not just the field activities, but the marketing. To get back to that, the marketing. What happens when you have a million different crops and you only have one box of each? You have to aggregate. So these agricultural aggregation centers that we call food hubs, where a lot of farmers bring together a little bit of stuff, then it's in quantities that wholesalers or even individuals would want to purchase it, is an essential part of this strategy. And along with specific crop kind of manifestos, in this case, the Forgotten Fruits Manual Manifesto for apples. Why are apples so important to us? What is the history of them? What are the different cultural uses of them? Cider, culinary uses, all these things, storage. So each crop has its special information, this education, the recipes, all this stuff. The cultural aspects are essential to provide the value for this diversity for human beings. Next. Lastly, the most overarching system that I've seen that integrates a lot of these different aspects of sustainability design in a perennial agricultural system has been the agrarian platforms. And these numbers 1 through 10 are based on how the level of permanence, the scale of permanence. So climate, we have our climate. The easiest things to change are at the end there, soil, economy, and energy. We can work with that, but the first things, we really have to design for those first. And so that's what this system's about. Just one more here. And so the Agrarians platform is actually a kind of a handbook, a workbook. Darren's been all over the world doing this on a broad scale, and he has some really good formulas. He has some rules of thumb. He has practical experience doing this with animals, trees, fodder crops, annual stuff, everything. So this is something I think we will all benefit from learning from the system.
They have a great online community, lots of farm design tools, software.
Oh, they have an amazing social system. So anyway, we'll end there. One more. Back to the beginning. That's us. So open up for some questions and discussion.
We have time, yeah.
If we have time.
So we ran out of time. So what I propose is just to pick up now the 2 questions, and then just to remind that we still have 1 slot in the discussion section, just in the section about permaculture. So I propose that just to bring the rest of the discussion into this section, just to enjoy this meeting with conversation. So please.
Questions, comments?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I'm going to go way out on a limb. And have you ever used a pendulum?
Well,
Radionics?
yeah, so in permaculture, we're kind of agnostic in a lot of the spiritual practices that you might see arise culturally. And I would put that in the spiritual practices department. So, for example, though Bill Mollison says some of his favorite farms are biodynamic farms, we can't point to any specific practice that's been proven scientifically that would result in a superior farm, other than the consciousness of the farmer is raised. So I would propose that. So any practice that increases the people's relationship with the land, I'm all for. I can't recommend it if I don't know how to do it or don't have personal experience with it. But mostly what we're looking at is arranging things in an efficient way, and the humanistic aspects of it are totally culturally appropriate depending on the context.
Other questions?
Can you speak to, in terms of tillage, like conventional disc rotation and the disturbance and the impact on the soil versus a keyline plow?
So inverting soil with a moldboard plow, disking is a little shallower, but moldboard plows where you're actually inverting a large depth. It's disrupting.
They got the tiller and the
the
spader.
motivator, yeah.
The spader.
So yeah, there's a lot of different ways, and some are more gentle than others.
But we're talking about a ripper just running through the soil. It's like hardly even tillage.
Yeah, cutting a slot through it is different than turning it over for sure. So that's a quick answer.
So, thank you very much.
Thank you.